Not convincing, but showing you to look in this direction. Only some of the evidence. And these are some of the standard things that people think about when they think of UFOs. But it's part of the converging lines of evidence. It's not the major part, but it's part of it. Worldwide sightings are on the rise. They're going up every day. Just in Canada alone, 769 reports. These are just reports from RCMP officers. I have a file in my briefcase of 117 pages from the Ministry of Defense of reports by citizens, police officers, RCMP officers, and NORAD jets scramble to chase these things. NORAD jets. Not just once or twice, they do it on a regular basis. There it is. I read my mind. All those who are involved in psychability, raise my hand. You get it? Yeah. Okay. UFO sightings in Canada increased over the past 16 years. These are just little tidbits of information. They're relatively meaningless in the long term, but if there's a novitiate out there who are uninformed, these are interesting facts. But this is something that I was involved in 20 years ago. I'm no longer interested in seeking out lights in the sky. This is a geopolitical issue for me. And we want to deal with tonight's main issue. We have testimony by ranking military officers, pilots, ICBM launch commanders, air traffic controllers, corporate executives, an FAA accident investigation, a senior, I think he's one of the top three, if I'm not mistaken.
He was the head of it.
He was the head of the accident investigation unit for the Federal Aviation, whatever the other A is for. And also, statements by Paul and by Stephen this evening. So that's basically it. And what I'd like to do now is take a run at, if you can just give me a second here to actually we do the DVD. Yes, let's do the DVD now. Do we do that now? Okay. So, those of you once again in the press, you've now been empowered with a little bit of information. And that sense of empowerment, I think, is changed now from when you first walked in the door. And I'm hoping that when you do, take the stuff back to your editors. Okay? You've only heard, one half of this evening's presentation about. We're going to talk about now the implications that Brigadier General Stephen Lufkin alluded to with corporations and how President Eisenhower was sold out. So now we have a body of information, and now we're going to proceed to try to come to grips with what the geopolitical implications are of this, and which is even more staggering. So what I'm going to do now is introduce someone that I feel very, very strongly about, and he came forward last September 25th. And he's not an ufologist. He's not someone who is steeped in this information. He's someone who has served our country in the bravest of ways by coming forward and using his name and his integrity. And believe me, when you get into this field, your integrity is at stake. Make no mistake about that. Criticism comes from all sections. So I wanted to introduce to you the Honorable Paul Hellyer, who, as you probably know, served as the Minister of National Defense under the Lester B. Pearson government here in Canada. And last September he said, as Michael alluded to, that UFOs are as real as the planes that fly over our head. And those words will resonate in Canadian society, as far as I'm concerned, until this issue comes to the forefront. And once again, I don't want to harp on it, but the media, I challenge you to engage this issue in the most stringent of ways, and don't let let anyone tell you that this stuff is bogus, because it is information that is profound. And then we have a man here at Paul Hellyer who's willing to stand up and be counted and say, people, please listen. So, ladies and gentlemen, Paul Hellyer.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out tonight and learning more about what I consider to be one of the most important subjects facing the future of the world at the present time. Victor said last September, I went public as someone who believes that UFOs are real. I didn't do that on a whim. I was totally convinced. I read a book which I would commend to any of you who are interested in the subject, written by Colonel Philip J. Corso, retired United States Army intelligence officer, who actually saw one of the cadavers and who was involved in feeding some of the wreckage from the Roswell crash into United States industry to be reverse engineered for the benefit of the United States military forces, the Army in particular, which was the force that he was working for, and also, as it turned out, for some of us. In his book, he makes it clear that some of the ideas were not new ideas, but what happened was that with the help of the technology from the wreckage at Roswell, the United States industry was able to speed up the development of a whole range of products, to speed it up immeasurably by years, and in some cases maybe even decades. And so this was something that really influenced me, and I told this story in September. I'll repeat it again. I just happened to take this book with me when I was going on holiday last summer, and I was reading it. My nephew, Philip came along, asked me what I was reading, and I told him, gave him a little bit of the information from the book, and he said, well, I'm very skeptical, and walked away. 2 days later, he phoned me and said, I just talked to my friend, who's a retired general of the United States Air Force, and I mentioned the book to him, and he said, every word is true and more. Well, that was good to hear when I had already made up my mind that this was authentic stuff. I went through my mind and said, is it possible that someone could fabricate this story? Is it possible that it could be like the life of Pi, and that someone had just had such a wonderful imagination that they could put together all this stuff? I came to the conclusion that the answer was no. There were too many dates, too many real people that I knew about, and too many facts that were impossible to refute. So before I went public in September, I phoned Philip and asked him if he would give me the general's number, because I had met him at a air show a couple of years earlier, and phoned him. So I did, and hello, General, it's good to talk to you, and I think Philip told you why I'm calling. It's about Corso's book, and he just repeated every word of it's true and more. So then for 20 minutes, he proceeded to talk about the more. And there were some things he couldn't talk about, but even what he did talk about was as fascinating as anything I'd heard in a long time, perhaps until the day with spending 2 or 3 hours with Dr. Stephen Greer. In any event, it wasn't the fact that there are UFOs, which I am absolutely, totally convinced there are, that made me go public. As I said at the time, it is the policy implications. I'm a policy wonk. I'm concerned about the future of our society. I'm concerned about the future of our planet. And I'm concerned about governments that claim to be democratic and where somebody